It's a sobering thought, but I realized I graduated from college when a good number of you in the building were not even alive. It was 1977, and there was basically less than a month break because I graduated later in the summer before I went to graduate school. I had chosen the University of Alabama because of their debate team. I'd been good friends with their debaters, and now I was going to be a graduate student teaching public speaking, getting a master's degree in communication studies, which, by the way, I never got. And then working with the debate team. And when I got there, there was a feeling that, I knew them because I've known them over the years, but when you move into a new place, you really don't know people. You know them when you see them on the weekend, and you have this sort of shortened Reader's Digest view of them. Now, of course, I was getting a full range of this Alabama debate squad, many of whom are still very dear friends and are tuning in either this evening or they watched this morning because they know I'm talking about them. What I learned about them was that almost every one of them were parrot heads. Some of you may not know what a parrot head is. Our organist would be scandalized to learn that you do not know what a parrot head is. He's one himself, and so is his wife. They're shameless. Parrot heads are people who love Jimmy Buffett and go to all of his shows. And I learned in 1977 that the number one pastime of Alabama debate was, of course, Alabama football. Nothing ever gets higher than that, still to this very day. But a close number two, Jimmy Buffett. Many of them by 1977 had already seen him 15, 20 times doing road shows. I began introduced into his music. I kind of thought he was a country singer, and that was well before my country phase, so I just didn't pay attention to him. But as I began to listen to the music, it immediately intrigued me, and I became, I'm not a parrot head, but I've certainly become a fan. I've seen him live more than I've seen any other performer, but my number of times is 5. It's nothing like what parrot heads do, which is in scientific notation. They've seen him that many times. His music, though, always spoke about the human condition. His characters are always very memorable. He locates so much of his music in the tropics. By that I mean the Caribbean. And so those memorable characters have some really wonderful things to say about life. So I looked at the gospel this weekend. The first thing, literally, that popped in my mind was one of my favorite of his songs called A Pirate Looks at 40. It's dealing with a man who's in middle ages and kind of recognizing that what he wanted to be, he's not going to be, and he's not really quite sure what else he really can be. So it uses the metaphor of a pirate who's running out of places to go. Here are the lyrics that jumped out at me. Perhaps you'll see why I linked it to the gospel. He says, and I've been drunk now for over 2 weeks. By the way, drinking is a prominent theme of Jimmy Buffett's songs. That's why I like it. I passed out and I rallied and I sprung a few leaks. But I've got to stop wishing, got to go fishing, down to rock bottom again, with just a few friends, just a few friends. I love the ending. Mother, mother ocean, after all the years I've found, my occupational hazard being, my occupation's just not around. I feel like I've drowned, gonna head uptown. It was that line, I've got to go fishing. And in the middle of what seems like a throwaway dialogue, Peter announces to his disciples, I'm going fishing. They decide to come along with him. If we don't know the full context of it, we miss what's really happening here. So let me set the context for you. This is still within the aftermath of the resurrection. The one thing we learn is that the crucifixion of Jesus and all the events surrounding it were traumatizing. To the apostles, to Mary, to his close friends, really to the town. It was a traumatic event, and traumatic events do not disappear, as every one of us knows. Trauma stays with us, so we have to kind of work with the waves that come from it. And so Easter Sunday morning was, while it was not traumatic, mostly left them bewildered. They didn't understand what's going on. They didn't have a logical explanation because to this day, there's still no logical explanation of an empty tomb and then Jesus appearing and then disappearing and appearing and disappearing at all these most unpredictable times. Their heads were literally spinning. I remember they're suffering rather recently from trauma. It only happened a few days before, by now maybe a week or 2 weeks before the events of our gospel this morning. The only thing that makes sense to them is to go back to where they came from, where they understood how to make a living and what to do with their lives. Literally go back to where they had started from. It reminds me of that company called ServPro that would always be brought in when you've had a disaster of some sort, like a fire or flood damage in your house. And the way their commercial went, it said, like it never really happened. They promised to restore your house as if no flood had taken place, as if no fire had taken place. And their restoration work is apparently very good. But we understand that destruction on the scale of you needing a Servpro is a traumatic event. And while you can say like it never happened, everyone who's been through trauma knows it happened. So the disciples, trying to get the trauma out of their mind, go up to Capernaum, and then they start their fishing business again. That's what Simon Peter meant by, I'm going fishing. It's the one thing he knew. And of course, he left the commercial enterprise there to follow Jesus, so the boats were still there, and the other people in Capernaum were still there. So the disciples then go out in the boat, and you heard the rest of it. As commercial fishermen, they always knew what to do, and in this case, they had absolutely nothing. Dawn breaks, which is an instant sign of the resurrection, by the way, but dawn breaks, and there is Jesus on the shore. They don't recognize that it's him, which is consistent with all the other stories. Jesus appears and disappears. It's not obvious who he is, not in any one particular way, and so more of that bewilderment, more of that confusion, more of that disorientation. And he's on the shore, and they're about 100 yards offshore, and he hollers out to them, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" And they answer, "No." Commercial fishermen, probably feeling great shame at their inability to go back to the craft, the one thing that they thought they knew well. And then Jesus doubles down and tells them, cast their net on the other side of the boat and you'll catch something. A dead giveaway that they're going to catch something. And you know what it is? It's a miraculous catch of fish, a different version of the story we heard earlier in the liturgical year, because it's used in John's Gospel after the resurrection. And they ultimately have to pull the net ashore. It's filled to the rim with 153 fish. I remember in seminary when we studied this gospel, the professor said, I wonder who counted the fish. You know, we have really no idea about whether really there was 153 or not, because the very next thing that happens is Jesus looks at them and he says, come have breakfast. He's apparently set up some type of charcoal fire. He has fish and some bread on there. And my instant thought, I don't know about yours, if I appear for breakfast on a beach and someone's got some grilled fish and a piece of bread, I would probably say, can't we just go to Waffle House? But of course, that was not an option. And the disciples began to recognize who it is. They know that it is the Lord. And whatever is happening is part of that miracle, part of that disorientation. They got as far away from Jerusalem as they could get to go to a safe place, and there he is again. There's really no escaping this risen Christ, which, by the way, is the best news humanity has ever heard. But much like that parrot that looks at 40, our apostles were at a career crisis, trying to find meaning, direction, and purpose in their lives, not yet recognizing the purpose would come from being followers of Jesus. A quick coda to this story, which is in Acts of the Apostles, which we heard as our first reading, takes place at least a decade, if not a little bit more later. And in Acts of the Apostles, these are changed men. No longer are they bewildered, no longer are they frightened. They preach confidently the name of Jesus. They're accused by the authorities of them blaming him for the death of Christ, which, by the way, it was their fault, and they refuse to be dissuaded from it. These men who look so shiftless and so insecure and so unable to rise to the moment now have become the men Jesus destined them to be, the men and the women who were the very first people to start the church. So it's important to see that even in moments of questioning, even in moments of failure, even in moments of trauma, a future still awaits us, a future that is unlocked by following Jesus. Which brings me to a second Jimmy Buffett song that I particularly like, which is called Trying to Reason with Hurricane Season. You know, the song's about a hurricane. You can be thought of it on the literal level. A hurricane, a destructive storm. We've already introduced the idea of chaos and introduced the idea of trauma into our discussion, and so that we can kind of get the concept of that. But the reality is it doesn't have to be the windstorm hurricane. The hurricane can be a metaphor, which is certainly how Jimmy Buffett is using it. The reason why the song resonates is that whatever that hurricane is, since it's only a metaphor, represents a destructive disruption that's happening in our life and some change that we have to make. Here are the words that I think are significant from that song. Well, the wind is blowing harder now, 50 knots or thereabouts. There's whitecaps on the ocean, and I'm watching for water spouts. It's time to close the shutters. It's time to go inside. And he finishes, and now I must confess, I could use some rest. I can't run at this pace very long. Yes, it's quite insane. I think it hurts my brain, but it cleans me out, and then I can go on. In other words, there is life after trauma. There is life after failure. There is life after disaster. And most importantly of all, there is life after death. I was on a cruise to Norway about 5 years ago, the Midnight Sun cruise that I had taken in May, the very first sailing that went up and then back down, a 14-day cruise. And in the midst of that, I woke up one morning and suddenly began to realize I was having trouble reading, that there had been, the pages looked blurry. I couldn't figure out what it was. I just was really having trouble reading. I finally deduced that I spent way too much time on the upper deck of the ship taking pictures and looking at the sun, and wondered if I had too much sun in my eyes. That seemed like a sensible explanation for what was taking place. And so I didn't worry about it, but I thought I'd be careful about how much I was in the sun, although it still really wasn't that careful. It's the midnight sun. It's out all the time, you know, so that the rest of the cruise went on, and the eyesight thing didn't go away. When I got home, I finally decided something's not right. My theory was retina burn, that I'd done something I shouldn't have done, taking pictures of sunsets, going straight into the sun, where it was probably more difficult in those northern latitudes, so I need to go to my ophthalmologist to be examined. When I went in and explained my symptoms, he had this grave look on his face, and then began to do a battery of tests. You know you're in trouble when they start doing that. An hour and a half went by, all kinds of different things that we'd done. He'd never done that kind of work on me before. And then he looked rather serious when he came to me, and he said, the first thing we must do is rule out that you do not have a brain tumor. I don't know about you, but you can't unhear the word brain tumor once it is said to you. And what was needed was an MRI as fast as it could be scheduled to see if there wasn't a tumor in my brain pressing on my optic nerve, causing my loss of vision. Thankfully, I was able to be scheduled about 3 days later, the mother of all stressors. And thankfully, the results came back that evening. The doctor had the sense, because he knows me, to call, that to not make me wait, to basically hear that there was no tumor. The MRI came out negative. And then he said, now we have to rule out multiple sclerosis and meningitis, meaning I'd have to go to the hospital and have a spinal tap. By the way, if you're just curious what a spinal tap is like, it's not something you really want to do unless the doctors really make you do it. I had the spinal tap. It was definitely a painful procedure, and then I had to wait 2 weeks to get those results. Ultimately, my fluid was clear, and so the doctor called me in and said, they've now ruled out the 2 things that could be causing my lack of seeing. Never mind, I still couldn't see very well out of that eye, which I call my good eye. When I finally went in to be examined then, I think literally the next day, he said, we've decided that you have idiopathic optic neuritis. I guess I thought I should have known what that was. I didn't. I didn't ask questions. I guess you should. I went home and Googled it. That's what you're going to do. Idiopathic means we have no idea why you have it. Optic means it's your eye. Neuritis means it's your nerve, something I already knew. Now I knew that no one knew why I had it, and my vision might not get better. Something did happen, though, which I shared with you all several years ago when this first happened. Over a period of time, I started seeing better, less of the blurring. What I didn't know till much later, in fact on this retreat, I really learned it for sure in the book that I'm reading, that what happens, my eye began to compensate for that blurry area, and information has been built from the synapses in your brain and your nerves, the other systems making an adaptation. See, after a traumatic event, there's still this adaptation where you move forward. But unfortunately then 3 years ago, I got macular degeneration in the other eye, the weaker eye. And once I had that, I had a new vision problem supplemented by the old one. The network that was helping me see a little bit better went away immediately when we had the macular degeneration. To this day, I'm under treatment with that. It is a struggle to use vision, which those of you that know me know that it is, although I'm surprised at how much I have adapted. Really, that's about the only thing that a person can do. You become so very aware of your limitations. I just got back from retreat, and so one of the books I was reading on retreat was from a New York Times reporter, a columnist Frank Bruni, who had the very same condition I had. Idiopathic optic neuritis, so his was more damaging than mine, and the fear was it was going to happen in the other eye. By the way, all this is triggered by a small stroke in your head, which means you can't unhear the fact that you have had a small stroke. So you're kind of waiting for the next one to fall. Frank covers all of this in his writing about what happened to him. It was literally like going to a time machine and reading through everything I did, the same tests, the same results, the same questions, the same confusion. Then he wrote something that really touched me, and I think it fits here tonight. I asked God that I not be saddled with more than I could bear, and that my back prove sturdy enough to be saddled with a lot. That second voice told me that I shouldn't think in terms of burdens and setbacks, but should hold tight to the knowledge that during previous chapters and moments of fear and distress, I had discovered the necessary stillness and constructed the requisite sense of security. Why shouldn't I trust that I would discover and construct them now? There's life after trauma. There's life after disaster. There is life after death. You and I still live in a world where there's all kinds of traumas. Each of you have your own trauma that you've done. Anyone who's been through the death of a loved one knows how traumatic that is and all the different things that take place. A serious illness, similarly traumatic. Profound difficulties, losing a job, losing economic independence, traumatizing. And we're emerging from a pandemic that for most people has been terribly traumatizing. They want to go back to the world like it was before, but that world doesn't exist anymore. And so when we try to go back, we get frustrated because there is no back to go to. All we can really do is move forward. And that's so beautifully illustrated in the Eucharist we're celebrating tonight. Eucharist is always about moving forward. It's not about looking back. The temptation is to think it's about looking back because the center of the Eucharist is the consecration, and at the consecration we recall the death and passion of Jesus Christ. The traumatic event that was at the heart of the apostles' experience is at the heart of our liturgy, but that tragic event has adaptation afterwards. The stone is rolled away, the tomb is empty. We begin to see that there's rising from the dead, and Jesus, who told his disciples the night before he died, I will come and take you there myself, lets us know that the only way we can move is forward. Tonight, when you and I receive Holy Communion, we will receive the Lord, who will meet us where we are right now, wherever we are in our spiritual journey, our emotional journey, our psychological journey, even our physical journey. We may not feel ready, and most people don't feel ready. In fact, we'll say, I want to be really ready before I see God. I think I know what we mean by that. We want our affairs to be in order. Let's be honest. When are our affairs ever in order? Mine are not. That's why I go to Waffle House. That's what I do when I finally want something that makes sense, that happens in my life. But Eucharist, you see, simply reminds us there's a purpose to our suffering, even though we don't understand it. There's a purpose to the direction that's happening in our life because Jesus is raised from the dead, and he is the one that will come to bring us to him, just like our loved ones who've died and gone before. None of this takes away the sting of death for us. None of this takes away the sadness of disaster for us. None of this removes the trauma. You see, it's not like it never really happened. In trauma, it really happened, but we really adapted, and we really survived. And let's face it, in the darkest moments, that all seems a question. That all seems like it's not going to end nicely. That brings me back as I close with yet another Jimmy Buffett song. Probably my favorite of all the songs. It's called He Went to Paris. It tells the story of a man who's lived a rather long and colorful life, and he's seen tragedy and he's seen great joy. I'm quickly kind of racing through the context for those who are utterly unfamiliar with the song, but the old man meets a woman and marries, he falls in love and marries her, and then they have a son. Then the war comes, and the son dies in the war. Then they bomb England, where the man and his wife were living, and she's killed by the bombs, and he's seriously maimed by it. So he leaves despaired about everything that's been taken away from him. As Jimmy Buffett says, he hops on a freighter and goes to the islands, where he now lives now. For Jimmy, it's always going back to the islands. It's always going back to that place that shows us promise, and I believe that's that metaphor for heaven. Here's how the song ends. Now he lives in the islands, fishes the pilings, and drinks his green label each day. He's writing his memoirs and losing his hearing, but he don't care what most people say. Through 86 years of perpetual motion, if he likes you, he'll smile and he'll say, some of it's magic, some of it's tragic, but I had a good life all the way. The song closes. He went to Paris looking for answers to questions that bothered him so. The answers we're looking for can't be found. The answer that God gives us can only be discovered. You and I are still on that journey. We are not there yet. Others who are there are watching over us, praying over us, ready to meet us. For them, there is no trauma. For them, there is no suffering. For them, there is for darkness. But while you and I still live, we have questions. And more often than not, our questions do not have suitable answers. But maybe the advice of the old man, and he went to Paris, can really help us. As we look back on our life, all of the things that have happened, including the things that really overwhelm us, but all of the things that happened, let's pray that each one of us can say, some of it's magic, some of it's tragic, but I had a good life all the way.